everybody. Oh.
It's on.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to call the Salem Housing Authority Commission work session to order. And those present are Councilor Chuck Bennett, Brad Nanke, Diana Dickey, Rich Clausen, and Dan Clem.
So what we'd like to do this evening is have Andy Welch, our Housing and Social Services Manager, do a presentation to the Housing Authority and about our financial system and trends going into the future.
Thank you. Appreciate everybody coming out tonight. First thing I'd like to do is, John Wales is here with me. I want to point out Linda Gregg, who's assisting, and Grace McCabe, Finance Manager, who's put a lot of the information together for us today. The agenda that we've put together is fairly short in order, and really I think staff wants to get as much feedback and insight and guidance from the commissioners here tonight, so we appreciate your time. The agenda is basically to review the 2011 to 2014 draft strategic plan that staff has worked on. That plan has not been before the commission other than at the first work session. We included it in your initial briefing book. SHA scope and financial overview. We're coming up to our budget season. We've just gone through what I'll describe a harrowing experience with the 2011 federal funds. We don't expect 2012 is any easier, so we kind of want to key in on a few variables for you all on what affects the budget. And finally, the future challenges, trends, and needs, and most of those you could probably recite yourself, being informed about the economy and the federal funding situation, but we'll talk a little bit more specifically about the variables that impact SHA in general. This is our second commission work session this calendar year. Other one we had was on January 18th. At that commission meeting, commission work session, we passed out some thick binders like I have here. So these are really intended to go into that. I encourage you to do so, please. That way we can have some running kind of capacity and conversations. At that meeting, we focused a little bit on SHA 101, but then I think we're, by and large, diverted into real estate-related discussion. Tonight, we want to reintroduce the strategic plan. We want to talk a little bit more about the programs and projects that fund SHA operations. And then we have a little bit of a PowerPoint presentation, but the PowerPoint is not the main entree. The hard copies you have, and the PowerPoint is really, I think, beneficial to the community at large out there looking, so they can kind of follow along in our conversation since they're not here. And so I'd like to, if I could, just start off really briefly with a little overview of what SHA staff are seeing as it relates to our operations and working with our clients. Specifically, how we engage the community and our clients every day. We have a waiting list right now that's growing. Over 5,000 households are on our waiting list for all of our programs. Some of those 5,000 may be redundant. I can't say that they're all unduplicated, but I would say even a conservative number would be at least 4,500 of them are households looking for affordable housing. Increasingly, our clients earn less and less. Therefore, the agency earns less and less. There's an impact there. Rents are lower, revenues lower. Our ability to serve the current client volume is under great strain, to the point, for instance, where we're limiting clients from moving out of this jurisdiction. There's a concept called portability. Portability allows housing choice and mobility. The agency is not allowing that right now. What happens if somebody moves to a higher rent area, then this agency ends up paying more for that individual to live there, which takes away from another client who's on the list. SHA is maximizing our services right now to plus or minus 10,000 individuals every day. Clients are growing more and more desperate. We see a tremendous amount of need and demand for subsidized housing. We know that this is an economic and wealth issue, a poverty issue, but it's also an affordable housing issue. There's not enough affordable housing for folks. Specifically, and this comes from the 2008 American Community Survey, which I'm familiar with, which is a sound document, sound basis data. It's used for various reports, but I'll just make note of a couple statistics. 25% of all the households in the Salem metropolitan statistical area, or the equivalent of 33,000 households, have household income of less than $25,000. 55% of all Salem households earn less than $50,000. 16% of all Salem individuals live in poverty or live in households with incomes less than $21,950 for a family of 4, or at the other end, $10,850,000 for a single individual. 42% of all renters pay more than 35% of their income for housing. There's a standard that HUD has, which is about cost burden. Cost burden is more than 30% of your income for rent, for housing costs. And then there's an extreme cost burden of more than 50% of your income for rental costs. That 42% of all renters equates into almost 10,000 low-income renters with cost burden. 10,000 households. We have a growing and unmet affordable housing need today. PSU population research forecasts the city will grow by 55,000 new residents over the next 20 years. It's likely, based on past trends, that the city will become home to thousands of additional community members with the need to secure affordable housing. We have a great deal of work to do, and we need to find policy solutions that address this challenge. I appreciate the council activity on the Housing Needs Analysis Committee, recently authorized. I think it's an important first step for community involvement in helping to guide housing policy, inform the city. SHA, I'm sorry, yes. I think that's what it's, yes. SHA can play a key role in this effort as the largest housing organization in the Mid-Willamette Valley, Mid-Willamette region, rather, and third largest public housing agency in the state. Affordable and stable housing is critical to community economic growth and individual empowerment. We don't have a really well-developed housing policy approach. It's something I think that task force can help to identify some issues. I think the folks that I've seen the names on that at least been recommended are quality people that can help the city and the community at large to have good information, informed information.
Does anybody know if the task force is going to look at whether or not other organizations in the region can do a better job at certain kinds of housing than we can, or that there will be some sort of policy recommendations coming from the task force to council? Is that?
I don't think that scope is included right now, but if that's something you wanted to do, that would be a good thing to talk to them about.
I'm sorry, well, then what is exactly the scope of the task force? We voted on it, I just don't remember.
I don't have the exact one here in front of me, but why don't I send it out to you?
Yeah, because I'm looking at a mishmash in this portfolio. We're all over the map, right? I mean, we just sort of inherited it, or we did it because of our housing authority over a 30, 40-year period. Now we've got this sort of portfolio. Maybe the CDCs could do a better job at certain kinds of housing, and maybe we could do a better job at the lower income sort of stratus of housing. So
Right.
if that's not in the task force, this commission needs to figure out what it should be doing, what business we should be in. Is it a fair statement to say our portfolio is kind of all over the map? Doral
Well,
House?
I think that's part of what we'll talk about tonight at this
Okay.
work session of what we're doing. And when
Right.
you're talking about the task force, you're talking about the Housing Needs Analysis Committee.
Okay,
that
that's
had
just
somebody
for that.
from- Yeah, that was just for that. It wasn't more
All right.
comprehensive about affordable housing. But thinking through how we can be more strategic about how we use the money we have and the properties we have, I think that is a good thing for us to be working through
Right.
over the next few months.
So we can do that at the commission.
Separate, yeah.
Commission.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
And actually, if I could dovetail off that, I've been thinking a lot about this because this is a big deal, and it's funny. I've been really bombarded recently with how different our demographic here in Salem is, Salem Kaiser community, than anywhere else. We went up to Bridgeport and went to a movie and then went to P.F. Chang's for dinner, and actually met the regional manager for P.F. Chang's, and I asked him, well, why don't you come to Salem?
Yeah.
And he was there, and he just happened to come to our table and check in with us, and found out who he is. I told him who I was, and we talked for a little bit. He goes, he's not responsible for
Yeah.
their development and everything, but he goes, the only key thing we look for is disposable income. Oh boy, his light went off. I was like, boy, we are just a different demographic of
Yeah.
Salem.
Yeah, we do.
A very different demographic. And it was really interesting to me, and it really keyed in the importance of the Housing Authority and what we do. And
I think she should talk into your microphone.
When you're talking to Mike,
Probably all of us
I figured since it was picking up my papers bouncing on the
Yeah.
table, I probably did it.
Yeah.
Potato chips crunch.
Yeah.
Anyway, but one thing I was thinking about was, is that kind of the intent of what we're starting now, is really starting to look at the overall big picture of this? Because if it's not, I wonder if maybe we want to talk about, and maybe this is maybe a question for you too, Andy,
Sure.
is what do other communities of our size and our, similar lifestyle of our area, what do they do? I mean, we don't compare to a Wilsonville, Tualatin, Portland. We don't compare to even a Eugene so much.
What do they do about raising average income levels, or what do they do about housing people who have a need for affordable housing?
Maybe more the housing
Okay.
authority branch of their local government. Is it always the city council that wears two hats? And then also, is it feasible that maybe we could discuss putting together something similar to the planning commission that might be able to really look in depth at our policies and at our demographic and what we have for our properties? Because I feel like when I saw our properties, doesn't seem like there's a real focus to it. It seems like it's kind of a conglomeration of, and I understand that probably some of it could have come from grants, so hey, let's use the grant if it's available to us and let's get some properties. But some of that might be in the past, so maybe we could put together a different strategy for the way our properties are going. And if we do that here, I'm great with that, but I'm wondering if that's what we're going to do, or if it's something that maybe we might want to think about delegating. And
Well, there are a lot of different models for housing authorities. In Eugene, they have the Lane County Housing Authority that's countywide, and that's mostly what you would find in Oregon, I believe. We have the county housing authority here has a different model than we do in terms of they don't provide as much housing.
They don't.
As we do. So I think it's great to look at all of that. I think it's possible to, if you wanted to set up a subcommittee or bring other people from the community together to sort through that. For us, I think what's most important is that we do sort through it so that we figure out how we can be more strategic as we go forward and whether we have the right mix and if we're doing something that's healthy or not. So,
I appreciate that completely. I think I would encourage us to learn the business first and really understand what we have and how it operates and the uniqueness of it, because really there are consistent threads, even though it appears like there are disparate parts, the consistent threads around the mission. And that's why the Housing Authority is here, is a mission to serve low-income people. But you're absolutely right, and that's a great segue, if I can. On page 3 in your packet, there's a draft strategic plan that doesn't include all of the strategies and tactics downstream, if you will, that we've developed. But this is draft, and I want to be really clear about that. This is about staff trying to get our hands around where we think the critical elements of business operations, strategic operations, and the overall mission rest. We've spent about 8 months periodically in small groups. I have a lot of rank and file staff involved to help shape the reality of our existence. Staff brings back proposals to the managers. We had discussions, and that's it's been a little bit of an organic kind of process. Tonight I just want to go over some of the goals at a really high level with you. And I think these goals, from my perspective, look for your guidance, are a pretty good start on evaluating the organization comprehensively. The vision for the Housing Authority is there. I'm not going to read that to you. The mission is there. 5 long-term goals. These are not in rank order. One is not of greater priority than the other, in my mind at least. You certainly might want to rank them. Goal 1, increase resource allocation to stabilize homeless and at-risk families. A critical element, I think, in all of the actions that the City Council has taken lately, that the Commission has taken, that this is clearly something that is important. Where am I? Oh, I'm double-sided. That's where I am. Under this goal, we've attracted 25 VASH vouchers from the VA, for instance. Working with social service and private landlords, 13 project-based Section 8 vouchers in partnership with Salem Kaiser CDC, who's actually housing those individuals, and we're just providing the rental voucher to them. That's an example of what we're doing. Goal 2, design and implement strategies to invest in community priorities. We are supporting a program through self-sufficiency called Family Mend. Family Mend brings in small amounts of money that help people get medical attention on any given day, get dental attention on any given day. It's kind of a poverty resource. Hands and words are not for hurting people. Interestingly enough, you all are familiar with that, I believe.
Yourself or others?
Right.
Presentations to me so far.
As a sideboard, my youngest daughter plays softball, and the coach was the son of the doctor and his wife, and what is her name? I'm forgetting. I apologize. And so I met her there, and then one day we brought the representative in to talk to the Housing Authority staff, and we realized what a great program to reach out into the public housing residents and our broader residents to begin to provide some tools for folks to address their concerns and confrontation in a healthy way. On Goal 2 also, we have a memorandum of understanding with Northwest Human Services for permanent supportive housing. Once again, a priority for the city and the agency, I believe. Goal 3, develop comprehensive business processes and procedures for all key business lines. I won't bore you with that, just suffice to say that we're trying to do things in an efficient and predictable and consistent way, and that's about customer service, and that's about how our different business operations work. Staff-driven teams, taking ownership, being leaders, building capacity. Goal 4, invest in agency staff capacity to deliver the best possible programs and services. We are trying to position the staff in the agency, independent of their level in the agency, to be leaders. Finally, Goal 5, develop a comprehensive resource development strategy, which I think gets to what we've just talked about. That's about how we position the real estate portfolio, how we diversify the revenue base for the agency, and really how the agency would retool or reinvent itself if it were a different type of model for a different purpose, keeping in mind that the ORS statutes, of course, direct this organization to be what it is mission-wise.
Andy, can I ask a question?
By all means.
And it really is truly a question. not intended to play with the wording that you've done, you and the staff have done. If 16% of the Salem area are at the poverty level, then what's the available housing so that they can afford it? Was that 35%?
Sure.
Of their income? What percent are we hitting with all of the CDCs and everything else? Are we 12%? Are we only hitting 6%? I mean, it sort of makes sense that in a strategic plan you have goals, but then below each of those goals you have objectives. Maybe.
We do.
Okay, all right, so you'll get to that.
But I didn't want to be presumptuous to bring in all those elements.
Yeah, that.
Do we know the answer to that question? How many?
Do we know how many housing units at an affordable
We
rate?
know what our waiting list is, but I don't know if we know how many people are not even on a waiting list.
So what we know are the universe of units that the city has funded over the years and the regulatory agreements on that as far as who they're supposed to serve.
Right.
We certainly know the Housing Authority and we know the CDCs and all of our partners in the community. There
Right.
could be private units that for a philanthropic basis an individual might be making available to somebody, certainly the faith-based units that are not really, kind of off the books, if you will. A housing needs assessment, which is, I think, once again, the premise of that committee. I think that's one of the benefits. I was on the COG team for that, and what I saw is, I know there's a lot of land use issues, and I don't want to say anything about that. But for me, it was about, here's a data baseline so we can be informed about what the needs are in the community. And I think that's a terrific.
And for me, all this gets down to real simple. Just that.
Right.
If the 16% are at the poverty level, how much of that housing are we all somehow meeting? And if it's 12%, then our goal is to get 4 more, an increase in the amount of housing available for people at that poverty level. So I'm being oversimplistic, but all these things are good, but at some point in time there's got to be some targets. So I'll let you continue to go on, but I really want to keep it as simple as we can. And if we're going to have goals, I want to know, what are they measuring? That's right.
Question. I know when we did that tour, the Housing Authority tour, we talked a little bit about Section 8 vouchers, and I just know with my employment with the county, trying to hunt down who offers Section 8 vouchers, there's no comprehensive list that exists. And some of those are those untapped or unknown resources out there because there are so many providers that, private land property owners that could provide those. So that's something I know you had mentioned, doing a little more concerted effort into trying to recruit people that will accept those vouchers. And I'd love to see if there was some sort of comprehensive list. I don't know how possible it would be to come up with that, but I think that would be a great resource if it was available.
I think at this point the best list is really drawing a blank. It's a Big Race. The Emergency Housing Network, I'm sorry, EHN, which is 45 providers that come together, and SHA convenes those meetings. So there you have individuals that are opting in, and so we know what units there are there. Most jurisdictions do something where there's an electronic, online kind of housing database. Which is something we've talked about in the city a little bit, about bringing in some services like that so we could make sure that when clients are looking for housing, they have a single place to go to do so. That might be an option at some point down the line. It's kind of like the 211 implementation that the United Way and other folks are doing around access to social services. It's kind of a companion piece to that.
If I may, essentially the other element of that, because we're treating a symptom rather than the actual problem, is how do we take the 16% and start moving it down to 15 and 14 and 13.
Yeah, and that's through economic development activities. Yeah.
But not just economic development activities. I mean, when my dad was raising us from kids, he was working 2 jobs. Do we have enough jobs out there, and has anybody actually looked to see what's out there? You know, minimum wage jobs are not for families per se. They're for the kids while they're in school and the retirees that want a little extra money after. But where are we on the actual job analysis
Hey, Brad?
front?
This is,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, that's something, you know, we were talking about the social fabric of our community. Fortunately and unfortunately, when it comes to housing the poor, there aren't too many demands on us other than having a need for housing. When it comes to developing skills and that, yeah, the federal government kind of has you to keep your hands off of what people have to go through because of the lower housing standard for, you know, they need help. And that's been a challenge to me, because when I came in, I had someone that said, hey, there's this for you and that for you, and you can go to school. So it was really good for me, and I thought, wow, everyone should have this opportunity. And he said, yes, they have it, but they don't have to take it. And I feel somehow there should be something in place when you're paying for a person's rent, that there should be some skills that they see also a need for, because it's taking a person out of a poverty mentality.
Right.
So this is something that I think housing has to struggle with, because they've got things in place that could really affect change in the community and people coming in with a need base, right? But what happens is they get kind of stuck in it because they've got their own resistance, they got generational poverty issues.
Yeah.
And how do you address them if a person isn't challenged to get some help?
Handout versus hand-up mentality to some extent.
Well,
in
that's
cases.
exactly what I was going to say, is can we, as part of our strategy as the Salem Housing Authority, come up with incentives to get people into higher paying positions, or help them to get moving forward, help them motivate themselves and get moving forward? I'm big on the incentives. And some of these things might come with some of the funding we get. I'm sure federal government has some requirements, things like that, but
Right.
how can we try and leverage any of those requirements for incentives for move-ups and move-outs, and then also for, maybe requirements that are part of the funding of the areas? Because, we could just fund housing forever, but that's not going to fix any of the issues. So is that something we can incorporate into a strategy as we move forward? And what that really means, I don't know. I'm learning a lot here.
Well, why don't we, I don't know if you have an answer right off the top of your head, but we could,
Family self-sufficiency
Yeah.
program we have is an economic empowerment and upward mobility program. It's funded very thinly by the federal government. There might be ways to lever other dollars for something like that. That certainly is a part of the strategy.
yeah. Well, we're making notes of these so we can get
Yeah,
back
because
to it.
that's a critical element on it.
Yeah, it is.
I mean,
I know.
how many of those people, percentage-wise, are really low down on the list, and they're the ones that really need the help versus, this person just needs a little bit of extra push maybe to get up to the level to where they're self-sufficient. And there's a lot of questions and minimal answers. There's the faith-based community. There's probably some private opportunities for mentoring and what have you to give people that next step. But yeah, it'd be nice to have a goal to reduce 16 to something.
Right. Okay.
The last thing on that is SHA can't do it alone. They just don't have the resources. So it's really a community mobilization,
Yep.
and that's one of the things that's kind of
Partnerships.
missing a little bit as well. On to, if I can push this along a little bit, SHA scope and financial overview on page 4. We just put together a little visual for you so you could kind of bifurcate those programs, SHA-owned properties, federal programs, other programs. Those are the programs that you'll find in the SHA budget. Those are the ones that are contracted by the federal government directly to SHA, or properties that SHA owns. On the right side, the individual budgets and audits, those are fee for management, either as a general partner in the tax credit deals, Parkway and South Fair, or as a fee property manager for Hawthorne and Englewood East. And so you won't see the individual budgets in your budget coming up in August and September. Those budgets are set really by the partnership, or in the case of the managed properties, by the owners. That's all I really wanted to say about that, just to give yourself some context for the budget as it comes up. Going to, on the next several pages, it's a general overview of those 5 SHA-owned properties, federal programs, other programs, managed properties, and tax credits. And so to start with SHA Central Office, that is the management office for all the programs in properties. It's funded by management fees from the properties that we own and manage, admin fees from the voucher program, public housing fees from the program, and these are all fixed fees with performance measures. You have to pass the tests, number of units occupied, having properties running in the positive, net positive cash flow, and other real estate driven kinds of variables in order to earn those fees. And so the central office is a recipient of those fees, and that pays for quite a few staff positions, and I'll get to that a little later in a different document. But it's also most susceptible to program pullbacks. When public housing or Section 8 are decreased, well, 20% of 0.8 is a lot less than 20% of 1. So that's what we kind of face in our budget on an ongoing basis as well. On page 6, SHA-owned properties. There are a total of 124 units, duplex triplexes, Englewood West, Southview Terrace. SHA owns those outright. They may have been partnership deals in the past, but the partnerships are extinguished. And so those are and will be in the SHA budget. I'm going to move on to page 7, federal programs. The federal programs, 2 in particular, public housing and the voucher program, that makes up almost 80% of our budget.
On the voucher program,
Yes, sir.
you list 2,815 housing choice voucher units.
Right.
Is that what's funded, or is that what's available right now?
Good question. 2815 is what's established in what they call our annual contribution contract, ACC. So technically, we're only authorized at 2815. You can lease up in excess of that, and you'll remember this past year we were leased up in excess, and the agency earns fees for leased units. So the more you lease up, the more fees you earn. However, in the next fiscal year, you may not get sufficient resources at that maximum lease up, so you always got to stay pretty close to your ACC. So the answer is yes, that's what they contract for, though you can lease above that if you wanted to.
So there could be more availability, but this is the number of vouchers we get.
Correct.
Okay. If you had more availability, how would they be funded then?
Well, so HUD will come out periodically with additional, so there's housing assistant payments, which are the money that goes to a tenant to take out into the private market. And then there's the admin fees that pay the agency to work with that client and manage the program. So we have reserves on the housing assistance side, have very few reserves on the admin side. So we've got money that we can lease more up, but we don't want to go too far above our ACC. But we don't really have the resources to pay ourselves to do that work. And right now, we run about 500 clients per voucher staff, which is the next highest one I can find in the state is 425.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, Grace.
Just one quick note, you cannot exceed the ACC for the calendar year.
For the calendar year.
Right. You can exceed it on an individual month using your reserves, and it's to our advantage to run it as close as we can to the ACC cap, but you can't exceed it or you have to pay it out of your own administrative fees.
And exceeding it is on a month-by-month basis. So you can be high in one month, but you've got to get down later on in the year in order to be at that average of your ACC.
How do we get the ACC increased?
Well, HUD's cutting the Section 8 program, and we're fighting for what we have. So legislative action, advocacy, I don't have a better answer than that.
So this is Section 8.
This is Section 8, yes.
And how is HUD allocated, how is the Section 8 allocated now? Because, as I mentioned earlier, our demographic, and we know our schools are 50% free and reduced lunch. I mean, do we get more vouchers per capita than
No,
Portland?
no.
So it's not based on any type
It's
of
not based
demographic?
on need like that, no.
An assistance program not based on need?
Well, I mean, the clients are need-based.
So when we have the direct allocation, now what's that based on? That's based to some degree on our demographics.
Yeah, the 2815, where is that number based
The
on demographics in any way?
2815 is a historical number that the Housing Authority over time has applied for additional vouchers and gotten them. I'm sure there's some needs test when you're applying for more vouchers that you have to show that there's a greater need than that. But HUD's, I mean, I don't think we've gotten any new vouchers on our ACC for,
Not recently.
right.
Have we applied for more?
Yes.
Well, we've applied, Commission authorized us to apply for 100 family unification vouchers, which we didn't get. We're applying for all the BASH vouchers. Actually, any voucher notice of funding availability that comes out, we're bringing that to you all to go and try to get more vouchers. We believe that's the most efficient way for us up to some threshold. I mentioned 500 per staff casework is about to that threshold. But that's clearly a more expedient way to serve those in the greatest need rather than trying to build or buy or develop.
Oh, yeah, I just was curious how it works, you know.
Does Kaiser have a housing authority that does this kind of program?
No, we operate in Kaiser and Salem. We have Section 8 tenants who live in Kaiser.
And does Kaiser also have county Section 8 housing?
They could. Section 8's actually, I mean, they can really take those to any jurisdiction. We don't have any public housing or any other owned housing in Kaiser, do we?
We don't have any other public housing in Kaiser, but I think that Marion County can't operate in Kaiser. I think we have that.
Well, but they're
jurisdiction.
vouchers. A voucher holder could go into Kaiser.
Only from ours.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, that seems,
They can pour it in and then we absorb them, or we build them, but they can't just move into Kaiser with the Marion County.
I would be interested at some point, not now, but understanding whether Kaiser is maximizing its housing responsibility as well.
I'll move on from there. No? Okay. Very good. The only other, the moderate rehab program on that same page 7 is one that doesn't get much attention, though it should. It's 2 single women resident apartment complex that we contract with HUD. And that contract expires on different dates, mid-year, March, April, and so it renews annually. Project-based rents, 36 units total. On other programs is kind of a potpourri. Public Housing Capital Fund to make capital needs to public housing. That's been being decreased this year by 25%. Resident Opportunity Grant is the equivalent of self-sufficiency for public housing. We have a staff member who works with 46, I believe, public housing residents to help them move up and out of public housing and upward mobility. Security Deposit Program, the city funds for helping people get into places when they don't have the prerequisite resources. Doral House, we took that on for a short period of time. We've got a lease that that we can, at our sole discretion, get out of whenever. we have housing down there. It hasn't been an efficiency kind of issue for us, and so, but it's something that if it does become an efficiency issue, it certainly the agency could remove itself. And finally, South Care Daycare used to be with who was the agency? Excuse me?
Willamette ESD.
Now it's with Willamette ESD. Right.
It was.
Used to be Head Start. Now it's Willamette Educational Service District. Right. I'm going to go on to page 9, managed properties. 2 managed properties.
Yeah.
Hawthorne House, owned by Chemeketa nonprofit. Inglewood East, owned by Tea Time nonprofit. So you may have heard me at some point. I'll go to the tax credits and then I'll make this quick point. Parkway Village, 124 units, and South Fair Apartments. Now, the managed properties and the tax credit properties will not be in the budget that comes before you in August. You might have heard me mention at some point about the various, what I consider to be our business lines. It's asset and property management, managing property, providing housing. It's about service delivery, not social services, but client delivery, family self-sufficiency, and helping people to get from here to there and be in a better place. And then, of course, we are a facilitator of relationships. We connect with nonprofits. We connect with other partners. We don't want to and don't think that it's in our mission to deliver social services directly. We think it's better to partner with the social service agency, have them do what they do best, have the SHA do what it does best, which is the housing part.
Sure. A quick question. On that South Care, are we managing and running a daycare?
No. We're just leasing it to a third party on a
Okay. So we
standard
just lease them the
commercial
space
lease.
so we don't take their liability of the daycare.
Well, it was a community space in the project, and I think it has to be maintained as a community space for a commercial function.
Okay. Thanks.
Before you leave this, to go to the budget timeline, I
Yes,
want
sir.
to ask, who, you mentioned the need and the list, this 5,000 people. Is there some way people move on that list? I mean, I assume it isn't just take a number, that there is an age, income, or some sort of qualification. I'd just be curious, who's at the top of that list right now? Who's not getting a house that wants one, or an apartment?
Well, we haven't been issuing new vouchers for the last 3 months because we didn't know what was coming from the budget, and so on attrition, we haven't been putting them back out there because we can't afford to do so.
But is it old, poor people? Is it middle-aged?
So
Is it single?
in the admin plans that the commission adopts, there are various preferences: homeless individuals, domestic violence, and really the hardest to house population. Seniors are not a preference per se. Disabled seniors are disabled individuals, but we can certainly, if the commission wants to look at a different set of preference criteria, we can certainly look at that. But
I just wondered what
right.
it looked like. Who is number one, and what do they look like? That's all.
We could bring that information back.
we
And do
get a
some
feel for
analysis.
who it is
Yeah,
that's waiting
but people
out
could be on the list for how long?
the oldest, not age-wise, the longest
Longest on the
person
list.
on the list is March of '09.
Okay, because I was approached by a person today riding their bike through the park who stopped me and said they've been waiting for a couple of years. Apparently a single person, and I knew we were going to be talking about this. I was but it was
Could be.
clearly an able-bodied individual,
Right.
no kids.
Right.
Okay,
We
but that's possible.
that's possible.
Okay.
Right.
I have a question too, before we move on. So what is, as we've talked about, self-sufficiency and helping people move out of poverty, what is the turnover rate? I mean, what do you see, what's the longevity of your tenants? Are they there for years and years, or are they there for a few years till they get on their feet and then they're out?
Well, so putting aside seniors, right, and putting aside what I'd say is, I'm going to say a number like 10%, which are long-term residents that may not ever move anywhere else for a range of reasons. Our attrition rate is about, well, it varies. Right now, I think it's like 30 vouchers per month. Month.
Out of 2,800.
Right. Right.
So that's
So it's 12, 13% turnover per annum.
So,
1% per month.
so what, do you know what the average, I mean, say a family moves in, a family who's living, right at the poverty level, are they destined to be there for 5 years, 10 years, 1 year? I mean, what does your average tenant look like that way?
Well, I don't have an answer. I mean,
Yeah, we'd probably have to
I'll
bring
bring
that
some
back.
information back. I could make some generalizations, but I don't want to, if that's okay.
Well, I think part of it for me is understanding how transitional this housing is and how permanent it is. I mean, what's going on here? Are we the permanent housing of last resort? Or are we the transitional housing for folks going through? Or I understand we're a mix, but are we weighted one way or the other? The number seems low in terms of transition.
My guess is we're weighted more towards longer term, but we'll bring that back.
Well, and we're a permanent houser as opposed to Mid-Willamette Valley that has 18-month rental assistance, for instance. And so generally there's a continuum, and they would transfer their clients into us for some permanence. But we've got a substantial database. We can
Yeah, we'll look at
pull the various tenures and so forth out.
I guess this is probably more of a comment than anything else. If this is more of a permanent place, then that is a disincentive for people to want to move up and out. If they're, they're on the waiting list for however long, and it's like, I finally got my apartment, my house, and then they're set. So that's just kind of a long-term, just thinking out loud, that might be something we need to be thinking about in the model.
Right, and that's actually exactly where my mind went, was maybe what we can do as part of our long-term strategy is come up with a strategy of maybe we try and take a percentage of what we have and try to make it a little bit more transitional to come up with those incentives and help those people out. And maybe that would be something we could do with application priorities, would be, if there's that person who's kind of right on the cusp, and if they could just get a boost up and get a little bit of help out for a year, year and a half, and get themselves going again, it might be helpful. Now, it could be naive of me. I'm not real up on this.
Or we could learn that there just isn't any other options for these folks. And, I've heard the complaint, well, my housing assistance is going to end. And so we need to find different solutions.
Right.
But, we're in charge of this, and I'm not convinced that we really know how transitional we are. So I agree. That data to understand how long people are there, maybe we should affect our policies to understand that then, if in fact they have to stay there because they don't have any other choice.
Right.
It seems like the demographics of Salem particularly, and maybe Kaiser too, are more of, we have, how many prisons here? 5? 5 prisons, or hospitals, or whatever somebody wants to. But these dependency-based agencies are here, and so we may not have the demographics to be able to qualify for more than 2,815 vouchers. But I got a dollar. It says the federal rules don't allow you to get more vouchers because you have 5 prisons and hospitals in your town. I'm sure their demographics are of a different type. So we have to struggle with understanding we run a housing department here, and some of these people are going to be with us for quite some time.
The other thing we know from other work that we do is affordable housing projects just haven't penciled out for a long time. So that next level of housing that people would build that, others may have an opportunity to go into, there's a pretty big gap there.
Good discussion.
Where's the local philanthropists?
Yes, that's what we need.
Call Bill.
Yeah.
The only point I really want to make with the budget timeline is, as I mentioned, 80% plus or minus of our resources come from the 2 federal programs, public housing and housing choice voucher program. HUD's fiscal year is at 10/1 to 9/30. Our fiscal year is at 10/1 to 9/30. However, HUD funds those 2 programs on a calendar year. So the last 3 months of the year, we're in one calendar year, and we have to forecast for what's going to happen the first 9 months of the next year. And so, and I think it's true that June and September, where I have the arrows on there, June for the voucher and September for the public housing, that's not uncommon to not know, and right now, we don't know what resource we have, though I understand we're getting very close.
Next year's federal budget's going to be ugly
It's going to be terrible, right?
with all the stuff they're going to tie to this debt ceiling.
On page 12, real quick, I just wanted to put a little graphic together for a little bit of financial overview of the 3 primary federal subsidies: tenant rents, grants, and miscellaneous. SHA-owned properties, revenue, expense, operating income, debt service, capital outlay, net cash, reserves, number of staff. I think it's important on our own properties, that net cash reserve 14,747, that would be a small amount. I'll just say it that way. On the federal programs, whatever reserves there are in a lockbox for specific uses for that federal program. And finally, on the other programs, it's there are no net cash, small amount of reserves, and that would be some of the family self-sufficiency pieces.
And these reserves are adequate? Are these the right numbers? Is this the right percentage? We've gone through so much of this in our own city budget.
Right. You know, the reserves for the properties is not adequate, but that's one of the aspects we're working on that we think they'll be capitalized a little bit better over the next few years. The federal programs, even substantial reserves, even today, HUD is considering funding agencies at a lesser level and forcing them to use their reserves as an offset. You know that term, right?
Oh, yeah.
And what's important, I think, is the federal programs and the other programs are very restricted, and those 2 programs make up about 93%. The 7% tenant rents, I mean, that's the area where we've worked really hard to maximize those rents, because that's the only working capital, if you will, discretionary resources, not discretionary at our whim, but, you know, to try to make something happen, if you will, or create some buffer for the agency. So we operate on a really thin level of financial flexibility.
Quick question on that. Do we have a policy in existence for our owned properties reserves?
Well, the
Percentages or anything along those
funders are going to dictate how much reserves we have to put away as a part of their investment.
But we've never as a body set a reserve.
You could set it higher than that, I suppose.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
I'm curious
I
about.
don't believe we have in several years.
That might be something we might consider as
look
well,
at.
just to make sure we,
We're doing it with all our other programs from the city.
Yeah.
we make a habit of making policy on what our reserve amounts are. And it might be that we set them right where the funding
Yeah.
limits are, but, because what does 645,000 represent?
Well, we'll see that in the next sheets, right?
All right.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
And so this is we're on page 13, the budget, consolidated operating program. Just to orient, far left column is the budget we thought we had, the $24,050,000 in revenue. First vertical left column. In yellow is the budget we think we have based upon what we're hearing from HUD, what we know about our operations, revenue, expense, staffing. And so net cash flow along the bottom, 140,909. Yellow column is 0.6%. If you look at total revenue. And then you look at the net cash flow, central office net cash flow of 27,586, SHA owned housing 14,747, the same number we were looking at a minute ago. Public housing net cash flow, that stays in the deals. And then you look at the line below that, available reserves, $116,000 in central office is the total cash in central office, which is 1 month's plus or minus operating for the admin area of the agency. $645,000 in SHA-owned housing. So most of that is locked up in the tax credit deals. And 2 other properties, what?
It's just duplex, triplex, Inglewood West and Southview Terrace.
That's the majority of it?
Well, that's all owned.
Oh, I'm
Managed
sorry, you're right.
properties aren't in here.
Right. And so, public housing, available reserves, vouchers, mod rehab. A couple things to note here. In trying to come up with a budget forecast this late in the year for the last 9 months that have gone by, we've included a little bit of, in the red there at the bottom, you'll see our assumptions. We believe our public housing operating subsidy is going to be cut by 4.5%. The voucher fee cut by 7%. And we have built in a little bit there just in case we have some cost increases.
What's this variance? This last column called variance, it all looks negative. I'm not sure I understand.
Variance from the original to our forecast now.
Okay.
It is all negative.
Original
Mostly.
versus the yellow column.
Oh, I get it.
Yeah. Those are the reductions in horizontal line items from.
Well, you just didn't go up anywhere, did you?
No.
I got up one spot, a couple of
No.
spots, but
And you know what? We've been very, very frugal, and I think we can, if these assumptions down here come true, we think we're going to be right at the margin. But
right. Okay. Thank you.
Andy, when you say that on the owned property, 645,000 is tied up, so that means we don't
Grace-
have
Grace-
645,000 in reserves in the bank.
No, we do, but they're restricted to each of those 3
Right.
properties. So
Oh.
duplex, triplex has a fixed amount. I don't have the exact numbers with me. And West and Southview Terrace have their own reserves. Of all the properties we have, those 2 properties, West and Southview Terrace, are probably the best as far as their reserve status.
So do we kind of tie reserve to each property we own? Say the single-family homes, do we have any reserves on
The
those?
single-family homes are part of public housing, and the
Okay.
reserves
Oh,
for
they're all in the
those-
public housing?
Right.
Okay.
And those reserves are dictated as to how HUD sets those up.
I see.
They're in what you call an AMP, so they're specifically restricted. The scattered sites, individual homes, is considered to be AMP 1 under HUD's, and so the reserves are restricted
Okay.
to that. There's some fungibility you can do within the HUD rules, but you've got to go through the hoops.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to see how that works.
the larger chart here is not one I'm going to go through, but it does have each of the properties broken out so you can get a project-by-project snapshot as opposed to a roll-up snapshot. I think particularly interesting are the 4 rows at the bottom where it talks about some metrics: average revenue per unit, average expense per unit, debt service expense, staffing costs, total percent of expense.
Is there in looking at these metrics, is there a target that we should be looking for, sort of a, boy, this one's out of whack, this one is okay, or,
Well, you know, it's interesting because public housing doesn't do a debt coverage ratio.
okay?
But if I had to do a debt coverage ratio, if we're at 1.25, which means we've got 125% of the revenue we need to service all expenses and debt, that would be the target. That's what lenders do today. 10 years ago, they did 110, didn't work. You know, properties are underwater. But I would say that's about right. And then it's also dependent on the specific capital needs of any one property.
Okay.
So what do we do about the 6 properties that have more average expense per unit than average revenue?
Well, so if they're public housing, we want to get them in the net positive, because if they're negative, then we're not going to earn our fees. But if they're public housing, there's the public housing reserves come in to make those public housing properties whole. Now, I mentioned earlier about we're serving lower income people. You know, our revenue is down substantially on the scattered site units because we're serving people that make less income, and they only pay 30% of their income.
Right.
And so the public housing subsidy has grown a great deal. The rents are way down, and so that's why we're negative on the scattered sites in particular. And we're working really, really hard, but that's the nature of our socioeconomics of our clientele.
So there's not, so I'm assuming we are managing these on a property-by-property basis and putting the rents as high as we can to try and cover our costs, but, you know, I know our rents are limited that we can place. So what other measures are we taking to try and get those back into balance?
Well, we're keeping all the units occupied. We reduced our expense load quite a bit, reallocated some staff, and we're, on a daily basis, we're looking to get that down.
Okay.
The staffing cost is a percentage of total expense before debt service, which is the first real line. If for SHA ending balance, it's 48.66%. So does that tell me that of the total expenses on any SHA properties, our staffing costs are almost 49% of those, half of the expenses?
If you look along that same line, you'll see scattered site, 56%. Some as low as 33%, 25%. But so that's the average.
That's before debt service?
Right. So of every dollar of expense, 48.66 on average goes to pay staff.
But this does not reflect the cost decreases from the layoffs that we did.
It does not, right.
That's going to take a while to show up. This is current.
Right.
Okay.
It just seems
High.
like, as an administrative expense, it seems awful high when it's compared to the total expense. 48, I mean, if I didn't have an explanation, I'd
That's
say,
direct
oh
bill,
my
right?
goodness.
Direct bill. That's not our overhead. That's direct bill.
That's payroll.
Right.
Of our staff?
Right.
But we do perform some maintenance on our own, correct?
Well, that's a separate one.
Well-
Maintenance costs.
No, the maintenance costs are the contract costs. That doesn't include the payroll costs. for
These are
maintenance.
payroll costs. Right.
For our own staff.
So we have
Why-
maintenance on pay.
Why would Northgate be 60% then? Why, I don't understand.
Well,
That just depends on, since it's billed as they work on those projects. If there was a major program that they did a rehab for, some project on that, they would have had more maintenance staff assigned at that particular time. So these numbers will roll as you get your actual costs in.
Okay.
And that's what these are. These aren't budgeted, these are actuals.
Okay.
So it begs the question, what's our administrative fee? Is it 10%? I mean, is it 12? Is it 2?
It varies depending on which program you're talking about. Public housing, we have a fixed fee that we earn that HUD sets, and they haven't increased it in 3 years.
So what is it?
For public housing, it's like $46 per occupied unit. We get nothing for vacant units. And then for vouchers, we get 20% of whatever the voucher admin fee is. And the individual programs like Inglewood West Southview Terrace, where we're managing those, it's like a 10% of the rent collected. So each one of those programs has its own fee structure that the central office gets.
So it doesn't make sense to say we collect an average of 12% because each one of them is so different.
right.
Yeah.
It just looks weird, 48.66%. Half of the expenses are all payroll. No,
It'll be
you know,
going down.
wow.
And it's going down, you said?
Oh, yeah. We'll see more of it when we do the budget for 2012.
Right.
Then the commission will see what we expect that reduction in staff to have done.
And is some of that due to deteriorating conditions?
Well, we have
So we're spending a lot of money on capital maintenance?
It could be. I think in many cases it is. We have the capital fund that is used for a lot of capital work as well, and so it's the shifting, I guess, the allocation of staff as we need them on different projects.
Right, so if I'm reading this right, I can add those two rows. And so 62% of the money we bring in, 63% of the money we bring in for this SHA ending balance goes to staffing and maintenance.
So you'll remember in our discussions about staffing allocation, that was one of the points that I made then.
Yeah.
Which is we're trying to reduce our overall expense load on the properties and have a more efficient model. And I think I think we'll see those efficiencies. Well, we're seeing them now, it's just they're not showing up as of end of April.
Okay.
But you just laid off
We did.
3 or 4,
6.
6.
So just to be clear on this, because, I mean, I see that number and it's like, oh my goodness, just like Dan said. But if your rents were coming in higher because your clients had a higher income, this percentage would be lower just by virtue of you'd have more resources, so it would be a lower percentage. So is that
would be.
some of why these numbers seem so high?
I think it could be. I think also scattered site public housing is woefully inefficient. We've had that discussion a little bit. That's one of the things I have on my list at the back of the meeting tonight as far as a strategy. I mean, I think there's efficient and inefficient housing, and I mean, no affordable housing is going to make a lot of money, but clearly when they're dispersed, it's going to be hard.
We could probably pull together some benchmark numbers for you so you could see what this looks like compared to other
Well, or what a
housing
reasonable,
authorities. Yeah.
what you're working toward, 48.6% is of the total expense, so it's irrespective of revenue.
Yeah, right.
It's a
It's
separate
expense.
number. They could bring in $1 million, Diana, and it wouldn't make any difference on that percent because the expense is what the total expense is. So, gosh, it just seems high. I'd kind of like to know strategically
Sure.
what the housing authority should be adopting as a goal in each of these areas so that we can say, look, we were at 48, it's lowering, and we're working toward 35 or whatever makes sense.
We can certainly show what we forecast.
Well, I think part of it too is not, maybe I'm the only one, not fully understanding what the jobs look like. What are people
Right.
doing?
I think that's part of what we
Because
need to do.
as soon as you say we've got each of these different programs going on with each of these different kinds of units, I begin to hear, well, no wonder. I mean, just trying to
Yeah.
manage different like sort of like a set of books kind of thing is really an expensive way to do it. So that may be part of it, is just, I really plead ignorance. I mean, I kind of understand a firefighter's a firefighter's a firefighter. I'm not sure I understand a housing authority person is doing a lot of different things that I don't know anything about. So.
I mean, these staffs are primarily maintenance mechanics and property managers who direct bill to sites.
Right. And I think the benchmarks
Yeah,
would be
that'd be
very
helpful.
valuable for us in just determining what we do. And then also, I think you've got a good point, though, Chuck, in terms of what we're looking at as an overall, what do we have? What do we manage and what do we own? We need to get our arms around. Maybe we're going to be better off and better serve the community by maybe limiting the programs that we subscribe to and do fewer programs better. Maybe we stretch our dollars further. I don't really know, but as you said, I'm going to have to plead ignorance there, and maybe could we come up with efficiencies by, narrowing our view just a little bit?
There are probably ways to be more efficient, but you may be meeting less of the need by doing that. And so that's what we have to look at. Yeah. Yeah.
I agree with that. Overall,
Yeah.
good.
Right.
We want to
Yeah.
deliver as much product
Housing as much as we can. Yeah.
As much housing as we can, but
in the most efficient way possible.
exactly.
Yeah.
And benchmarks would be great because we
Yeah,
might
we could
find
do
that
that.
other communities are doing this, and here's why, and oh man, maybe we should jump on the
Well, there's a lot
bandwagon.
of different models to manage your property, too, and we've not had that discussion
Yeah.
or gone there, but we certainly know what those are. We collect data from all the other housing authorities. We know what everybody else's expense loads are, so we can put that together pretty quickly.
That would be
Yeah.
great. That'd be
Yeah.
very helpful for me
Yeah.
for sure.
Good.
Yeah, another thing on, efficiency is, you need a standard. But within housing, there's a lot of diversity. You're dealing with, there's a lot of stress. So I actually admire and wonder how they're cutting back that many people. And then what's the effect on the people that are working? I mean, you can be in a position, I've been in positions where you break down after a while because the efficiency expectation is so high. So, you got to take people into consideration too, because it's pretty admirable what they're doing in the cutbacks. But, what's the long term on the people that are serving too?
You want to move to the final? Okay, great. I just need to find my And so, gosh, I'm not even, there we are, challenges, okay. I mentioned several different areas that, in talking about the programs, the federal funding amount and the timing. In addition to that, there are federal program changes away from traditional programs. The public housing is being rethought to more of a private model. The Section 8 is being reduced from a fee standpoint to the point where, you know, agencies that have a smaller Section 8 program really can't operate it. And so the federal program changes are going to continue. There's every week we see a list of what HUD might be doing in 2012. It's not vastly different than what I brought to you all a couple occasions this past year around, say, transforming rental assistance, where everybody, all housing is privatized. And so there's going to be those kinds of pressures, which I think are their decision criteria for where we think we need to go if something is not in our favor as an agency, as a board, as a community. But they're probably not the drivers of the business that we want to be in on behalf of the community. Those changes are going to happen, and then we just have to ascertain whether or not we can make those changes work. And hopefully there's enough political buffering that those changes aren't draconian to the point that they kind of were this year. But next year could be a completely different issue. Moving HUD performance measures, Grace mentioned that, you know, the fees haven't changed for 3 years, but yet the standards we have to hit change constantly. And so that's there's some variability there that causes a lot of compliance and monitoring, you know, hustling around to get reports in. I know you all know the ARA funding, and, you know, ours is ARA every day, you know. We have a lack of working capital. I mentioned that a little bit. We don't really have the resources for a rainy day fund or to make something happen. Even if there were an opportunity that came along, we saw that a little bit at Parkway. Didn't really have the resources to do much. Resource diversification, we're trying to put grants out there. We're trying to do that work. But I think the resource diversification is, in my mind, the critical thing. You know, if we know what our mission is, we know what we want to do, how are we going to pay for it? I don't think the traditional federal public housing funding is reliable for us to count on it as the source of funds to pay for it. I use the, you know, reduce our dependence on the Rust Belt programs. That's what I call them, because that's what they are. They're archaic, not invaluable, or not unvaluable. They're invaluable, but they're archaic. Stretching resources to meet client needs. We do that every day. And then the economic climate, local, state, federal, private retrenchment of affordable housing. It's happening at all levels of government for real reasons. And I wanted to really quickly take us back to the strategic plan just for a moment about what's in that is diversifying resources, maximizing our current resources, gaining efficiencies in our operations so we can reduce our costs and do more efficiently, leverage community partnerships, engage private. You know, one of the things that we haven't done as an agency, and and there may be niche industries or niche examples where this has happened, but it's not as broad. You know, we were talking about the community has to come together, and the community organizations have to come together to find some solutions on this, because everybody has resources. And that's to engage the private investment. There's a lot of philanthropic money out there, at least if you do the right things. You know, we're doing some grant writing, but it's on a scale that SHA, as a sole applicant, just doesn't have any gravitas, right? It needs to be a consortium of folks, and so I'll get off my soapbox on that one. And then reinvent the organization with new business lines to meet the mission. You know, we have a mission, and it's fairly clear. There may be other opportunities to be something different that still delivers the resources and still delivers the benefit to the community, but in a different way with different monies. And I think we need to and are looking at all those things. And so your leadership and guidance in helping shape this is extremely important and greatly appreciated.
If I could, I think the benchmarks we've asked for will help us start to give you direction about where I think we as a group want to to go with the housing authority? Because all the stuff you've mentioned is obvious. What I'm struck with is the fact that I'm not sure we know what we have. And so your benchmarks will help us understand, you know, how do we get up to that 16%? How do we get folks work? How do we understand what the payroll costs ought to be on an SHA property and that sort of thing? I'm not so sure that, I think once we see the benchmarks, I think we'll be able to help you with the strategic plan in terms of whatever it is you're looking for. But
I really agree with what Dan's saying in terms of the benchmarks, and I think it came into play for me with the realization the number of employees that were laid off and what the impact is, what that does to service delivery, and I'm really hopeful that one of the benchmarks will or more will kind of look at that, so we understand. I worry at some point you can that we get into efficiency and fail to understand service, and because we're looking just at numbers, and I want to be very cautious about that, because this, as we went through this, I realized, boy, this is not something I understand at all in terms of what you're doing and what you're, because you allude to the service delivery component, and I know it's a huge part of what's going on out there, and how that works, plus just the management of these sort of arcane HUD programs. I mean, they're just so complicated. From what I've seen of them over the years, I mean, it's just almost it's impossible for the layman to understand, and that we're not shorting you on support and expertise that you need in order to maximize that kind of funding as well, and that we're not, you know, driving people right off the edge by shortchanging somebody to help them do their job.
Yeah, and we've had a chance to talk about that, and we think we're right there. I don't think there's much more we can do, but then the challenge we have is if our subsidies decrease and if people's income decreases, we still have to do something else. And that's part of the strategic thinking we need to do, is what would be next if we can't reduce our costs any further.
or just to get smart enough to know what we have so we can legislatively lobby. When we go back to D.C., you know, we asked, when they had earmarks, we asked for, and we received some of those, but I don't know that I'm smart enough to be able to talk to Senator Merkley or anybody about what it is what you did with development grants, what that did in terms of putting more people on the street, or you know. So I think even if we don't see any easy solutions here, and we just have to reduce the number of vouchers or whatever, I think if there's 9 of us that are a little bit smarter about what it is we have and are we working towards some benchmarks, that empowers us to work with legislators to get that number up. What should the voucher number be? I mean, what? It's 2815, right?
Well, I think that's what I'm hoping to see in part of the benchmarks, though, too. Is
what should it be?
What other, you know, maybe Tri-Cities might be a comparable area to us. They're reasonably similar size. You know, what do they have? And they're, you know, they're very agricultural based. I would think their incomes would be similar to ours, and you know, that's very off the cuff. But what are some benchmarks? So, what's their diversity of programs? You know, where are their resources allocated and where they invested it? How many vouchers do they have versus us? How many vouchers does Hillsborough have versus us? I'd be really curious about that, because, you know, if they've got a lot more than us, boy, that's ammo. Okay, well, there you go. That's helpful to know. So I'm hoping for those kind of benchmarks.
Yeah, good.
And as well as the numbers, the dollars, but also, you know, the big picture. Okay, where are they invested? What do they do with their time?
Something I was thinking about too, and Dan, you mentioned it, you know, with the prisons, the mental health system we have here, surely you can take that position to federal, even state.
Yeah.
Because we're looking after a larger population. Once they come out of these places, they generally settle here. and it's starting their lives again. So I don't think a lot of the rest of the state looks at our position,
Right.
because we
I agree.
have, a responsibility.
Right.
And I think you can use that in best interest to probably get more money to this community. It's supposed to be a healing community. I mean, when it was founded on the principles of people could come here and get their lives in order. So
Yeah.
taking a stand on that, I think even the state actually would probably owe more money towards assisting others. It's not for the city, but more for the people that you are serving because of the things we have here to help people.
So I have a couple other questions. One, I'm coming from a very limited lens, looking through a very thin lens of 6 months on this, and I've kind of told people Salem Housing Authority isn't what I signed up for when I ran for council. And I'll tell you what, the more I learn about it, the more interested I am.
Oh, I'm so glad.
And very much so, especially, I can't even tell you, I feel like I got blindsided this weekend, really thinking about the demographic of Salem versus many other areas. And this is a huge resource to our community. And I have to say I'm extremely ignorant on this. And I'm curious on a couple things. One, in the past, how much direction has come from the commission? Because I'm feeling like there wasn't much, and I'm wondering if we can get ourselves educated, because especially in this economy, this is
Right.
that much higher of a resource and higher of a priority for us. So that's my first question. And then the second question is, I'm going to look around the room a little bit and ask, would it make sense for us to, if not so much an advisory body, but pull together a group of people? We are in the state capitol. We have the people who direct the state programs that are here and have been here. And is it possible that maybe we could somehow, even if it's an informal, impromptu, just let's see if we could pull some resources together and help us to get a little better educated, see if there are people who have some great ideas. Andy, I've been very impressed with everything you've done and pulled together. And I think, if we could sit down and have a round table and just kind of figure out, okay, hey, we've got some challenges here. We're getting bigger challenges as federal budgets are being cut and as the money coming in is getting less and less. What can we do to really maximize this resource? Because I don't even have the start of a place to offer suggestions.
Yeah, and fortunately, Andy does. I think as we get more information, we'd probably be ready to think about what do we want to ask a group of people? What kind of help do we need? So that would be good. I think I've been at the city now in my 7th year, and I think originally the discussions with the Housing Authority Board were pretty formulaic, is it seemed to me.
Yeah, we basically, it was like, oh, it's just part of kind of what the council does, so look at
Yeah.
your report, you look at it, see if there's any questions you
Yeah.
have, otherwise they kind of run themselves.
Right.
And there's really no direction, say for approval of the budget, approve the strategic plan, off they go.
Right, and so with Andy's coming, part of the reason that we wanted Andy in this position is it has to be more than that.
Yeah.
And as we were having, a huge financial challenge, thinking we've got to be able to use some other city resources to think about this and combine what we do in urban development and housing and our social service programs that we're all in different departments. We've been working, for now about 3 years to get to this point, and then it seemed like the next thing is to get the board members more educated about what is this program even, what are we doing, what are the challenges, what are the dollars look like, so we know how we're going to go forward.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Sign me up.
Great,
This is the
great.
most, these 2 or 3
Yeah,
work
that was good,
sessions
right.
we've had are the most I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Relative to.
Yeah.
We probably have a better understanding now of the housing authority than most of our predecessors in
Yeah.
recent memory.
Oh, yeah,
I think so.
Even with the limited amount you've had more than most of them have.
more than people who've sat here for 8 years.
Yeah, yeah. This is a really overlooked portion of
It
the
is.
job, and so I
Yeah.
really appreciate that you and Andy have started bringing us into this,
Yeah.
because I mean, I found campaigning last year, this was an issue that came up. What are you doing about the homeless? What are we doing about low-income housing? I mentioned today, I'm walking through Wilson Park, and a person rides up on their bike and engages me on housing authority.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen very often.
Means they're watching CCTV and recognize it.
But it really is because of the pressure for housing. I mean, the tremendous need, people are,
Yes.
I mean, at least this person was moved to talk to me about it.
Yeah, because it's not like people in that circumstance have a lot of options. And it may be, if people have to transition out of public housing, they may not have housing to go to. So it's a big community need that we have here.
No, I really appreciate this. I think this is just great.
Thank you. So do you want to adjourn?
Yeah, we'll adjourn the work session for the Salem Housing Authority.
Okay. How was this setting?
It's kind of crampy,
Yeah.
but
Do you think the Anderson rooms, even though we can't broadcast it for a short period of time, are better? You could just sit at your desk if you think.
well,
that was-
discussion was always
Conversation, though.
right.